What's going on, you guys? It is your boy, the American F1 fan, Eric Ringle here, and we're back with another video, and it's that time of the season in Formula One where, one, we're on summer break, but two, it's time for every F1 YouTuber to put out their mid-season rankings for Formula One drivers and Formula One teams. So let's get on to my rankings so far for the 2024 season in F1. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to go team by team. There's no specific order to this. It's kind of team by standings. There may be a couple that are in and out of place, but we're going to start off with Williams and start off with Logan Sargeant. Now, it pains me to say this because I want a U.S. driver in Formula One so bad, but unfortunately, Logan Sargeant just hasn't been that guy at Williams, and we've seen time after time Logan Sargeant make mistake after mistake after mistake. Now, granted, Williams hasn't, given him a full deck of cards as we've seen throughout the season so far. Williams has always had the upgrades go to Alex Albon first, and then slowly but surely Logan gets them. Now, we've seen some good qualifying efforts from him as of late, some okay, finishes as of late. But, I mean, let's be honest. Logan's just not cutting the mustard at Williams, and he's now lost his seat at Williams with now Carlos Sainz and Alex being in the car for 2025. So my grade for Logan Sargeant is unfortunately a D. Now moving over to Alex Albon at Williams, he's been a very average driver. Now, compared to where Williams was towards the end of the 2023 season, Alex is kind of still in that spot. He's Williams' basic lead driver right now, and that's not necessarily saying that he's been a standout driver, but Alex has been, I guess, to me, just average. He has been able to score points for Williams in the rare chances that they do have. He's got 4 points on the season, but he's also been given preferential treatment at Williams when it comes to upgrades coming to the car. We even saw it at Australia when Alex basically destroyed one of their chassis, and instead of allowing Logan Sargeant to race that weekend, they took Logan Sargeant's car, gave it to Alexander Albon, let him race, and he didn't even score points at that point. So it seemed to be a little bit of a just, why did you need to do it if you weren't going to score points anyways? And like I said, Alex is doing a good job, for a Williams team that was slated to really do a lot this year. But again, Alex is just average so far this season, so I gave him a C. Now, when you put that all together for the Williams team in general, this Williams team was expected to do so much this season based on where they had finished out the 2023 season, and we've just seen that Williams took a huge step back this year. They've been fighting for the latter end of the grid this entire season. Yes, we've had, some shock results where Williams gets into the points, but in the grand scheme of things, Williams took a huge step back this year. They haven't had the upgrades for both cars to go on at the exact same time. We've seen problems even at the beginning of the season where Williams was found to have, be keeping track of parts for their car on an Excel spreadsheet and just sounding very unprofessional. And, I don't know what, team director handbook that James Vowles got the Excel spreadsheet out of, but it just seems to me that Williams has seemed all out of sorts this entire season. They haven't been, doing both of their drivers a great service throughout this half season so far. So I ended up giving Williams a D for this first half of the season. So now moving over to Sauber, first up Zhou Guanyu, and this is another one of those that really, it pains me because I really felt like he was taking a step forward last year. He was, at times really showing that he could, stand up against Valtteri and put up some, results here and there. But this year has been just, god-awful. I think he's just been worse, as worse, if not more worse, than Logan Sargeant. And yeah, some of these results aren't his fault, but you had the likes of the Canadian Grand Prix where just even in practice, Guan Yu Zhou couldn't even keep it on the track and literally ruined the car twice during that weekend. And it's especially when you're dealing with weather, you are trying to do everything in your power to keep that car together, to keep it, in check to make it to the race weekend. We saw he was nowhere in Canada, and he's been nowhere ever since Bahrain happened, where he had his season best finish of 11th. And I actually rank Guan Yu Zhou with an F. So moving on next to Valtteri Bottas, he's done, I guess you could say, wonders with a Sauber car that has been absolutely nowhere. Obviously he finished behind Guan Yu Zhou in Bahrain, but ever since then, he's been on the precipice of points a couple of times. We saw it in China where, had he not had that mechanical failure, it looked like he was on for points in China. Valtteri has been the leader of that team. And, with 2025 moving over to Audi, it's going to be very interesting to see what that team is going to look like. You already have Nico Hulkenberg there, but Valtteri may not be a horrible signing, for Audi, getting into 2025 and then going into the new regulations of 2026. Valtteri is a very capable driver, and he's showing it again this season, bringing Sauber into places it probably shouldn't be. We've had a couple, Q3 appearances by Valtteri, so I gave him a C. So now here's the thing, talking about Sauber in general. It is amazing to me how a team was performing 40 to 50 second pit stops at the beginning of the season. It was shocking. It was absolutely shocking. And it took them almost 4 races for them to finally kind of get their heads wrapped around, how pit stops work in Formula One. And, we started to see the pit stop times go down, but they've just not been able to develop a Sauber, a car that, really should have been, starting to push more towards the midfield. We've just not been able to see them make the inroads that they need to be able to start that midfield battle. And unfortunately, with the beginning of the season and the way their pit stops and the way this team was shaping up, it's hard to not get away from giving this team an F. Now moving over to Alpine, first up, Pierre Gasly. For a team that was literally last on the grid when Bahrain finished and was finishing almost 20 to 30 seconds behind the second to last place cars, it was really quite frightening to see what had happened to an Alpine team that was, fighting for 4th and 5th in the constructor standings, just into last year and 2 years ago. But Pierre Gasly has been the bright spot for Alpine this year, and has really taken over that number 1 drive at Alpine. He's had some great results. He had the Canada result, which really, I think, catapulted their season and started to show that they're starting to make little bits of strides towards, getting back towards the midfield. And so, for me, Pierre Gasly is right now, at midway point of the season, a C. Now moving over to Esteban Ocon at Alpine, and, now that he's going to be out and he's moving over to Haas in 2025, it's saddening to see that, they kept Esteban Ocon over Fernando Alonso a couple seasons ago, when they had a chance to keep a guy at Alpine and really build the car and start to, build, their young drivers around a former Formula One champion. They kept Esteban Ocon, and, who was really supposed to be the number 1 driver there, the number 1A, however you want to put it. It's sad to see how Esteban Ocon has taken a huge step down this season. Just some of the boneheaded mistakes that, like Monaco, where he crashed with his teammate and basically took both cars out of the race. That's the race that I think, when you look at everything with Alpine, that was the decision that they decided to move away from Esteban, even though it took them several more weeks to announce. And unfortunately, Esteban's just not put forward the results that Alpine has been looking for ever since they've started to add these upgrades. And unfortunately, I graded Esteban Ocon at a D. Now, when you look at Alpine as a team, like I said, they were, fighting for 4th and 5th in the constructors standings just 2 seasons ago. And it's really disheartening to watch an Alpine team that has taken a huge step back on the Formula One grid. Now, I don't think they were nearly as bad as Sauber and the mistakes that they made and just not enough strides made to improve their car. Whereas we've seen Alpine slowly but surely starting to make upgrades that are improving this car and starting to put the right foot forward. Unfortunately, I still have Alpine graded at a D. So next, moving over to Visa Cash App, Red Bull team, and first off, Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki he keeps proving me wrong time and time again. I've always, and it's nothing against Yuki. I felt like Red Bull kept Yuki around because of the Honda, connection that they had there. And there were even rumblings that Yuki may move over to Aston Martin when they signed with Honda to bring Honda back to Formula One. There were talks that Yuki could move over there. But I think Yuki has proved a lot of those guys, including myself, wrong in just constantly stepping up year after year after year and putting up really, really, really good results for a VCARB team that, was slated for middle of the pack, but I think they were slated a little bit more further forward. But, in the grand scheme of things, Yuki has, really kind of proven himself in this season, and he's shown that steady improvement that I think Red Bull was looking for. Not enough improvement that they would have moved him up to the A team, but I think in the grand scheme of things, Visa Cash App has a really good driver with Yuki Tsunoda. And, I kind of cancel out what he did in Bahrain with that stupid bonehead after the race, tantrum that he threw. He still has put up really great results. And so I gave Yuki Tsunoda a B. Now moving over to Daniel Ricciardo. Now, Daniel is a guy that I think we expected a lot more from. He took over that seat mid-season last year, from Nick DeVries, and we expected that Daniel was going to step in, automatically become the number one guy there at Visa Cash App, and then, just kind of show why he needed to be moved back up to the main Red Bull team. But, in 2024 so far, Daniel has had some shocking results, has not shown the talent, and at times has looked worse than Yuki Tsunoda. Yes, we saw the 4th place in qualifying in the sprint race in Miami by Daniel, but there have been times where Daniel has just not put up anywhere near the results that Yuki Tsunoda has. Now we did see that Daniel got a new chassis in Japan, and that almost seemed to have kind of reinvigorated him a little bit, and we saw some results come out of that. But I really think the first couple races of the season went to show that, Daniel has just not taken the step forward that, Red Bull needed to see to potentially move him up into the main team. And that's, I think, probably why Sergio Perez stayed at Red Bull this season, is because of the lack of results from Daniel Ricciardo. And unfortunately, with those lack of results from Daniel, I gave him a D. Now, for VCARB, when you put that all together, VCARB has made a really good step forward in this 2024 season. They're really fighting for 5th in the constructor standings, and if Aston Martin keeps on the track that they're on, they may, VCARB, if they make the necessary upgrades, they could start challenging Aston Martin for that 5th place in the constructors. But right now they're sitting in 6th. With all that they've been able to do with this car, and, obviously being the Red Bull Junior team, it definitely helps. But in the grand scheme of things, I think they've done a magnificent job with what they've been able to do, and I decided to grade them as a C. Now moving over to the Haas F1 team, and there may be a little bit of bias here with what I'm about to say, but you guys know I'm a Haas guy. I'm a Haas Formula One fan first and foremost. So first up is Nico Hulkenberg. Now, Nico, I'm telling you right now, Haas, I think, is going to rue the day that they didn't re-sign him as one of their drivers to partner along with Oliver Bierman, who we've seen now is going to be one of the drivers at Haas next season alongside of Esteban Ocon. But Nico Hulkenberg has shown amazing talent this year for a Haas Formula One team that I, quite frankly, and I think a lot of Formula One people will say, is quite surprising that they're this far up on the grid, especially with how they ended up last season. Nico Hulkenberg had a streak of 11th place finishes just outside of the points. Now think about that for a second. Had Nico Hulkenberg just gotten one more place, that's 3 extra points that Haas may be able to add to their total. And Nico has just, proven time in and time out this season so far. He is the much superior driver at Haas and has brought that car to the, just to the he's brought it to the point now where Haas is consistently fighting for points with Nico Hulkenberg. And so with that being said, I gave my first A to Nico Hulkenberg. Now when you look at the other side of the garage with Kevin Magnussen, it's been I would almost call it a failure, but there have been times where we have seen, some good, decent racing by Kevin Magnussen, but then we've seen the absolutely boneheaded moves that he's performed in the likes of Miami and Monaco and, costing a team, a lot of money and literally almost costing himself a race ban earlier in the season. He still may get it because he's literally sitting 1 point away from getting a race ban. But in the grand scheme of things, I wanted Kevin Magnussen to, really prove himself and really prove to the team that he deserved to be that second driver. But he's just been way behind Nico Hulkenberg every step this season. We had that one really great moment in Canada where Kevin Magnussen was just moving himself up the field, and we started to get the bubble guts about, what could have been for Haas in Canada. But in the grand scheme of things, Kevin's just he's not been an absolute failure, but he did get graded at a D. Now, when you put that all together with Haas, again, as I said at the very beginning of this little grouping, Haas was expected to be the last place on the grid. Like, they were expected to be the absolute drizzling shits when it came to Formula One this year, and they didn't. Ayo Komatsu has done absolute wonders with this car. Now, we hear from time to time that Gunther is saying, oh, well, these upgrades were already in the loop when I was there and blah, blah, blah. But we've seen a drastic change at Haas. Before at Haas, we would see one massive upgrade come, midway through the season, and then we really wouldn't see any other upgrades, the entire time. Whereas, Ayo has brought in where they're bringing upgrades almost on a weekly race basis, to try to improve that car where they can. And you're starting to see that Gene is, starting to put money a little bit more back into this team because he sees he's starting to see the writing that this team can be competitive again. We're only, 2 years away from the new regulations and, God, what could be, with Ayo at the helm. And so I gave the Haas team, compared to where we thought they were going to be and what they've been able to do so far, I've got Haas at a B. Moving on next to Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso. He's a guy that Aston Martin can really depend on when it counts. He's been able to put up really good results all throughout the season. Every once in a while you get the team, downfall. But all in all, Fernando has done an amazing job in that Red Bull ever since they brought him over. And that's why they've re-signed him back to the team again going into 2025. They know the talent that he brings, and they know the fact that he's going to be able to put up points, whereas, we kind of still have those questions with Lance Stroll. And Fernando Alonso, for everything that he's been able to do at Aston Martin and pretty much put that car in spots that I don't think that team deserved to be in. I gave Fernando Alonso a B. So now moving on to Lance Stroll at Aston Martin. And here's the thing is I was pretty harsh on him at the beginning of the season, especially after the likes of Saudi Arabia and just the boneheaded moves he made there and just kind of how he talked and how he sounded whenever he was doing interviews. I felt like he was, basically checked out of the sport. Like he just did not want to be at Aston Martin or in Formula One anymore. And there are still times, let's not get it twisted, that he is an absolute bonehead. Like China, where he ran into the back of Daniel Ricciardo and tried to blame it on Daniel. We still see those mistakes from time to time with Lance Stroll, but he has put up the results, not as good as Fernando, but he's still putting up results that have got them 5th place in the constructor standings. So I gave Lance Stroll a C. Now, when you put that all together for Aston Martin, we've seen, like I said, Fernando Alonso put up results, and every once in a great while we see Lance Stroll put up those results. But in the grand scheme of things, Aston Martin should be a much higher placed team. With where we saw them at the beginning of last season, they had a really good baseline, and even towards the end of last season, they were still constantly fighting for points. But it seems like coming into 2024, they just haven't made the upgrades that have mattered to the team to the point where it's starting to push them a little bit further up towards those top 4 teams. And unfortunately, right now, I would have to grade Aston Martin at a C. Now moving over to Mercedes with Lewis Hamilton, who will be making the move to Ferrari in 2025. Everybody was giving Lewis Hamilton such a horrible time. He was not putting up the results that we saw from the likes of George Russell at the team. He wasn't qualifying as well. He would finish behind George Russell at times. But since I think about, halfway through the halfway point of the season, Lewis has really, the second half of the second quarter, I would say, the second quarter of the season so far, Lewis Hamilton has been on it. And Mercedes in general has just been on it. They've been bringing the upgrades that have really improved this team, just where it needed to be, put him back up towards the front. And Lewis Hamilton, has really been a part of that. We hear sometimes, that Lewis is not exactly happy with certain parts of the car or, certain upgrades. But I think that, what some fans consider whining is more, trying to push this team into a better position, to push this team back up towards the top of the Formula One grid. And, with all that being said, I graded Hamilton at a B. So moving on to George Russell. George Russell has just proven, I think throughout this whole season so far, just how valuable he is to the Mercedes organization and how valuable he'll be down the line, once 2025 comes, once the new regulations come. George has just been consistent this year. And, we've had some times where he's had to start from the back of the grid. But, all in all, George Russell has, really put forth the results to, allow Mercedes to think, the possibilities as they keep upgrading this car. And I gotta say, George Russell, everybody thinks he's the number 2 driver at Mercedes. I think he's showing why he could be considered the number 1, and that's why I graded him at a B. When you look at Mercedes as a whole, we were worried that Mercedes was going to be that 4th best team, fighting for 3rd between them, McLaren, and Aston Martin. But we've seen them make huge strides over the second quarter of the season, where they have brought the right upgrades that has brought this car back towards the front of the grid and is now starting to fight for wins on a more consistent basis, with the likes of Red Bull and Max Verstappen and even McLaren. And with all that being said, they finally started heading in the right direction, and you have to wonder if Lewis in the back of his mind isn't starting to question the move he's going to be making to Ferrari in 2025. And I think there are some questions in his mind, but with everything that Mercedes has done so far this season, I graded Mercedes at an A. Now moving over to Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, and this season for Charles Leclerc is, I feel like, been a kind of a step back for him in the grand scheme of things. It's really been kind of disheartening to see that there have been times that Charles Leclerc he's looked very pedestrian, not, had the results that I think Ferrari expected of him. Now, granted, Ferrari has, made a step back when it comes to their strategies. They've pulled some old Mattia Binotto strategies out of the library, dusted them off, and they've reared their ugly head. But for a guy like Charles Leclerc, who's basically the number one driver at Ferrari, you would expect the results to be way, way better than they are for him, and that's why I graded him at a C. Now moving over to Carlos Sainz at Ferrari, and I think when we look at Ferrari, obviously we would have thought that Carlos Sainz would have, not been able to, make the step forward this year because they've been building the car so much more around Charles Leclerc, even though Carlos has his says here and there, and then obviously Ferrari making the move to Lewis Hamilton in 2025, Carlos left without a seat for a long time. We were worried that Carlos Sainz wasn't going to be able to put up the results that they really expected out of him. But, if you look through all the races this season, one thing that I have been able to see is that Carlos has been able to bring the fight to Charles when he's been able to. We saw the win in Australia from Carlos Sainz, ruining the streak of Max Verstappen. We've seen some other great results from Carlos Sainz. And let's think about this. Carlos Sainz has missed one race in this season so far, and he missed that in Saudi Arabia when he had appendicitis and he had to have his appendix removed. Had he actually raced in that race, he'd actually right now probably be sitting on more points than Charles Leclerc. And with all that being said, that's why I grade Carlos at a B. Now, looking at Ferrari as a whole, we've seen some wins. We've seen Charles Leclerc win in Monaco. We saw Carlos Sainz win in Australia. We've gotten those feel-good moments back from Ferrari, but they're still having a problem with strategy calls, throughout a race weekend. We've seen them several times really just mess up Charles Leclerc's races by just dumb strategy calls, whether it's the race call in Canada where they moved him to intermediates a little bit too soon, or, like we've seen in Silverstone. And it's Ferrari still got the strategy issues there. And unfortunately, that's why they're not graded higher. And right now I've got Ferrari graded at a B. And now moving over to McLaren, this team, I am shocked. I think a lot of other people are shocked too that McLaren has been able to bring the fight to Red Bull this early in the season. Now, Lando Norris has been a big part of this for the McLaren F1 team. Lando Norris getting that victory in Miami, whether he lucked into it or whatever you guys want to say at home, Lando Norris brought a win back to McLaren. We've seen now the likes of Oscar Piastri get his first Formula One win. But with everything said, Lando Norris is the number one guy at this team, and he shows how much of a teammate he is, whereas he could have been all for himself and, taking that victory in Hungary, especially, in a chase for the drivers championship against Max Verstappen. Lando had every right to, take that victory and say, well, maybe you shouldn't have messed over Oscar so much. But Lando knew what the team had done and was the teammate consummate and allowed Oscar Piastri pass to win in Hungary. And as a team, McLaren has done wonders, but Lando Norris, definitely great job from him so far this season. That's why I gave him an A. And as I talked a little bit about there, Oscar Piastri getting his first race win at Hungary. He's really stepped up his pace this season. I think a lot of people were worried that he was, quite a bit slower than Lando Norris last season a lot of the times. And this season, we've really seen his pace step up. And he's really kind of in that same ballpark with Lando Norris, whereas, if you got an Oscar Piastri ahead of Lando Norris, he's able to hold his own throughout this season. It was a big step forward for Oscar, I think, this season to, at least equalize himself against Lando Norris in the team and to show that he can push Lando and, potentially win races from time to time. And that's why I also gave Oscar Piastri an A. Now, when you look at McLaren as a whole, I mean, they've rarely set a foot wrong this season in Formula One. I mean, McLaren has put the right upgrades on at the right times. Have had fortunes fall for them at the right times. And I think Miami was kind of that fire starter for them. Getting that win with Lando Norris in Miami, it kind of, gave them a little bit more of that shot in the arm that they needed to really put that team on the right path to fight a Red Bull for the Constructors' Championship. And, we're definitely seeing it now. And, I can't say that I wouldn't be surprised if, McLaren, with more results like we've seen this season, couldn't be chasing down the Red Bulls for first in the constructor standings. And with that being said, I've got McLaren at an A. And now moving on to the Red Bull team and Sergio Perez. Now, he has been probably the most disappointing driver, I think, on the Formula One grid with, not including Logan Sargent and Zhou Guanyu. And Sergio Perez, for everything, he started off the season very decently, was, a little bit behind Max, but that's expected with a team that really builds their car around Red Bull. But unfortunately, we've just seen time after time, Sergio Perez, through every fault of his own, has really cost Red Bull a lot of points this season and is, potentially cost them the Constructors' Championship with some of the results that he had, through this middle part of the first half of the season. And, he got in the points in this very last race before the break in Belgium. It still doesn't make up for the fact that he's just, he's nowhere near as fast as Max Verstappen. He's lucky he's still got his seat at Red Bull. There was I think a lot of people thought that he was losing that drive. He was either going to be moved to V-Carb, or he was just going to be out of Formula One in general. He's very lucky to keep his drive with the results that he's shown this season. And unfortunately, that's why I grade Sergio Perez at a D. Then we move on to Max Verstappen, and Max Verstappen doing Max Verstappen things early on in the season, win after win after win after win, and we thought, God, this season's going to suck because Max Verstappen's going to win every single race. And then we had Austria where Max Verstappen ends up out of the race and DNFing because of his brakes, and we thought, ooh, is that the kink in the armor that is going to be Red Bull's downfall? And then he goes back to winning again. But now a Red Bull team that has not really been able to upgrade that car much more than where it's at now. Max looks very pedestrian. He's very beatable, and he's shown it several races this season, and he's even making some mistakes that you would expect out of teams that are, second, third in the constructor standings, trying to fight to get up to first, like in Hungary, where he, makes that boneheaded move against Lewis Hamilton, takes himself out of the race in Hungary. He took himself and Lando Norris out of the race in Austria. He looks very pedestrian and very beatable this season. But with all that being said, though, he is still one of the top talent in Formula One, and he's still winning races. So I'm going to give Max Verstappen a B. So now when you put that all together for Red Bull, the thing is it's hard to get past some of the, off-season stuff that happened at Red Bull with the likes of Christian Horner and, the issues that they had there, all the infighting that's going on, allegedly between Jos Verstappen, Christian Horner, Red Bull, and now that they're losing Adrian Newey, we still don't know where he's going to go, but they've lost Adrian Newey, the guy that's basically been the grandfather of aerodynamics in Formula One. It just looks like Red Bull is starting to reach that time where, it may be time for them to take a step back, as far as on the grid and in the constructor standings. And, yes, Max Verstappen has had the results, but unfortunately, Sergio Perez is not. And it does not help when you have a guy like Helmut Marko who constantly can't keep his mouth shut and can't keep himself out of the news and literally roast Sergio Perez at every chance he gets. And unfortunately, with all of that being said, I rated Red Bull at a B. So guys, those are my drivers and teams rankings for the first half of the 2024 season. Guys, let me know in the comment section down below what you guys thought of my rankings. Tell me where I'm right. Tell me where I'm wrong. Let me know that in the comment section down below. Guys, hit that like button if you want to see more and more Formula One videos throughout the season. We also do our live streams, so be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can join me for those live race streams where we react to the race in live time. So guys, hit that subscribe button and make sure you guys hit the like button. But guys, thank you so much for watching this video. And guys, for the American F1 fan, I'm Eric Ringel, signing off.